the Szabo cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
I talk a lot about things that I hate. I hate fascism, for example, because it necessitates murder. I hate the police because, despite what people believe the police's role to be, it requires the protection of the state apparatus and private property over the people that it has supposedly sworn to protect. I hate the state apparatus because it is self-interested. I hate capitalism because it is specifically interested in profits over the well-being of people, especially as a mode of production where the workers do not own the means of production. They don't own the fruits of their own labor. They only own a very small sliver, while the capitalist owners own the whole damn surplus. I could go on, but these are my core principles, right? These are things I deeply care about. These are things that I have long since thought about for years, decades even, and has come to the conclusion that these things are bad for various reasons. And over the years, I put a lot of thought into these things, into all of these little things I just described, these conclusions, and how I came to the conclusions. It's a far cry from adapting a belief from somebody just because I like that person. No, even though I have my own influences, people whom I have revered for decades now of my whole life, I still question them sometimes, and I come to my own conclusions, whether or not I do feel inspired or influenced by them. So the reason why I'm talking about all of this, especially with listing some of the things that I absolutely abhor at the beginning of this podcast episode, is because there's something I absolutely despise more than any of that, right? It's not liberals, right? It's not transphobes, right? Like, sure, I hate those too. But what I hate more than anything else in the world, more than anything, is a fucking coward. Now, what do I mean by coward? Well, I think a better way to describe what I mean is what I don't mean by a coward, right? I don't mean somebody who deals with anxiety. I don't mean somebody who is terrified to the point to where they feel uncomfortable, that they have to set boundaries, that they are faced with something that gives them tremendous fear. Maybe even a phobia, like fear of the ocean, or fear of spiders, or fear of heights. No, I'm not referring to somebody who is dealing with an immense amount of anxiety. No. In my opinion, I think all of those people deserve respect, and kindness, and patience. I believe the Oxford definition of what a coward is a bit unhelpful, but for the sake of being thorough, a coward is a person who lacks the courage to do or endure dangerous or unpleasant things. The reason why I don't like this is because it does in fact fit my previous definition, which is a little weird, right? Because then you're probably sitting there like, well, then why the fuck are you even making this podcast episode? Why are you even trying to separate what a coward is from somebody with anxiety? Well, somebody with anxiety usually can't control that. Usually somebody with anxiety has so much anxiety that it consumes them, like a phobia, right? Somebody who has a phobia can't really explain the phobia. I mean, sometimes they can. Like, the ocean is huge, and you can drown in the ocean. Or if you're up in the sky, you can fall and die. Or if you encounter a spider, there's a good chance that it might have some poison, and you will get bitten. But then there are people who have like other kinds of more irrational anxieties. For example, my mother has a phobia of ladybugs. I think ladybugs are adorable, but I would never show my mother a ladybug because that would be cruel. It would put her in a very nervous state of being, and that just would not be right. So, no, I won't ever do that, and that's kind of my point, right? Because I wouldn't call my mom a coward just because she won't look at a ladybug. I think that's not fair. So then, what the fuck do I mean by cowards? Why do I hate them? Why do I fucking hate cowards? The reason why I hate cowards is because the types of people whom I identify as cowards are the types of people who will see something really fucked up happening, and in the face of that really fucked up thing happening, they will side with that fucked up thing happening. So, if, say, an oppressor is oppressing people, then the coward would side with the oppressor. And of course, there are many reasons why this could be. An example of this kind of coward are referred to as pick-me's. So Candace Owens, for example, as a black conservative woman, also likes to parrot various anti-Semitic and white supremacist talking points.
Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. So in thinking about how it could go bad down the line, I don't really have an issue with nationalism. I really don't. I think that it's okay. It's important to retain your country's identity and to make sure that what's happening here, which I think is incredibly worrisome in terms of the decrease in the birth rate that we're seeing in the UK, is what you kind of want to avoid.
Now, before responding to that, I'm going to play this clip. It's a different clip, and I don't want people to think that I'm taking her out of context by mixing this clip with the previous one, but I'm only doing this because it further gives context into Candace Owens' beliefs on not just nationalism, but what kind of person she believes Adolf Hitler was. Take a listen.
And I thought the person was sort of implying that nationalism is a dirty word, and we see that a lot in America, that nationalism is sort of conflated with, for some reason, Hitler. Like that the only interpretation or the only understanding of the word nationalism that people seem to have in America is they instantly think of Hitler. And I think that that's really, really wrong.
Let's break down her entire argument, both the first one and the second one. First of all, the reason why nationalism has such a bad stigma to it is because it is used to prioritize the interests of the nation over the rest of the people, which is really telling when Candace Owens says shit about globalism. Interestingly, globalism has a lot of varying definitions. I remember when I was first really learning about politics in general and using the term globalist myself to describe multinational policies and multinational trade agreements like the NAFTA Treaty or GATT or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The reason why I personally use globalism to describe this is because these types of trade agreements are countries coming together and agreeing that this is how we're going to govern all of our own countries, specifically for the sake of doing business. In other words, and of course I'm generalizing here, all of these countries are going to put profits over the interests of people when it comes to passing legislation, and this includes workers' rights, medical care, environmental protection, etc., so on and so forth. This analysis that I just gave is a left-wing understanding of the term globalist. It's not a left-wing principle, to be clear, but it is a left-wing understanding of the behaviors of multiple countries across the world coming to an agreement on several varying things in terms of the expansion of capitalism or imperialism, or whatever means for the countries to grow further and further for their own best interests. However, the right wing uses the term globalist in a very different context. Now granted, you can argue that it might be compatible with the former definition that I just gave, but it's not the same thing, to be clear. For right-wingers, globalist is a dog whistle. It is a way to signal to others that somebody or some entity or some organization are Jewish. It is anti-Semitic. One example of this is QAnon followers referring to a supposed cabal, making an absurd claim that some globalist elite ruling class of some sort is trying to undermine freedom, liberty, and democracy. The conspiratorial assertion that Jews run the world, or they own the banks, or they own the media, or they own everything, it's not just harmful to Jewish people, but it is a gross misunderstanding of the capitalist system as it functions. First of all, Jews are not a monolith, right? There's no single class of people who are referred to as Jews. Jews are rich, Jews are poor, Jews are European, Jews are not European. Jews live all over the world. Judaism is a global religion, just like Christianity. So I realized I just went down a deep rabbit hole with Candace Owens' speech already, but she said a lot more. Clearly her interest in declining birth rates is wildly unfounded, for real. Hitler made abortion illegal in 1933, and he made it very hard to get contraceptives. It seems like, politically speaking, Candace Owens has a lot in common with Adolf Hitler, which is a little weird to fucking say. But okay, let's cut the bullshit, right? Why would Candace Owens say this shit? Why? She's a black woman. Clearly, if Adolf Hitler existed today, he would look at Candace Owens as some kind of degenerate, and Candace Owens would be subjected to the same framework that Adolf Hitler and his policies treated non-whites. Of course, anyone who wasn't an Aryan, Hitler would treat them as such. So then a pick-me is somebody who appeals to an oppressor for the sake of kissing their ass and hopefully reducing or eliminating what happens to them eventually. Pick-me's are not a new thing, and since we're talking about Adolf Hitler here, we may as well refer to the OG pick-me. I'm going to give a brief biography of Ernst Röhm. Born in 1887, Ernst Röhm was a leader of the Nazi Party in Germany. A very important detail is that he was a gay man, and Hitler just tolerated it for the most part, because Ernst Röhm was convenient for Hitler's goals. Think about it, Hitler needed a strong arm in order to rule Germany, especially if he was going to obtain power. He needed strong people on his team. He needed somebody who was willing to call the shots. Ernst Röhm filled that qualification despite being gay. I want to share a couple of quotes from Ernst Röhm. This one in particular has to do with his thoughts on Hitler himself, since we're talking about Candace Owens' thoughts on Hitler. Quote, "He is thinking about the peasant girls. When he stands in the fields and bends down at their work so that you can see their behinds, that's what he likes, especially when they've got big round ones. That's Hitler's sex life. What a man." End quote. By the way, Hitler was in the room when he said this. Another good quote to reference for Ernst Röhm to kind of give a good idea as to what kind of person he is, quote, "Since I am an immature and wicked man, war and unrest appeal to me more than good bourgeois order. Brutality is respected. The people need wholesome fear. They want to fear someone. They want someone to frighten them and make them shudderingly submissive." End quote. And remember what I said, any reference to elites or the ruling class or bourgeois in this context, especially said by a fascist or a Nazi, is referring to the Jews, because the Jews are the Nazi scapegoat of the day, if you will. So you can tell that Ernst Röhm, despite being gay, still went out of his way to not only talk about Hitler in a very flattering way, but to also parrot some of Hitler's actual beliefs. So if Ernst Röhm was a gay Nazi, clearly Hitler spared him, right? Right? Well, no, that is not what happened. Unfortunately, the tale for Ernst Röhm did not end that way. You see, while the Nazis were preparing for the Night of the Long Knives in 1933, both Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich put together like a ruse to make this claim that Ernst Röhm was paid 12 million Reichsmarks by the French government to overthrow Germany, even providing fake evidence which Hitler believed. Hitler and his associates drew up a plan to kill a list of people, both political opponents and people from within, and Ernst Röhm was clearly one of them. Ernst Röhm was apprehended and held in Stadelheim prison. So on July 1st, 1934, Hitler told Theodor Eick and Michael Lippert to visit Ernst Röhm and to give him a pistol in his cell, and that he had 10 minutes to kill himself, or they were going to do it themselves. Do you want to know how Ernst Röhm responded to that? He responded in the most fucking pathetic way possible. He had his chest puffing out, and so he said, quote, "If I am to be killed, let Adolf do it himself," end quote. The two men would eventually kill him within the 10 minutes. Lippert was only given 18 months of prison for killing this man, and he wasn't tried until 1957. That's because he's been evading this entire time. This here is a string of cowards, not even just Ernst Röhm, not even just Candace Owens, but even the person who killed Ernst Röhm. From 1934 to 1957, he couldn't face an actual trial for so long. So do you understand why I hate people like this? Because you know deep down, these people are only serving the exact people who are going to kill them later. By emboldening oppressors and people who would rather see you dead, you're only going to inevitably get yourself killed. When we talk about Ernst Röhm and what he went through as a Nazi leader, we also have to think about as well, like Dave Rubin, or Milo Yiannopoulos, or maybe Misha Petrov, or Blair White, or Jesse Peterson. You know, this is interesting too. There are a lot of conservative black people who absolutely love Adolf Hitler, like Mark Robinson, who literally quoted Adolf Hitler, and he won the North Carolina Republican primaries. That is fucking scary. Not to mention, Mark Robinson in particular is like hardcore anti-abortion, like to the point to where conception is where life begins. That means if you masturbate, that means you are like a sinner, basically. He's like an absolutist when it comes to abortion bans and contraception bans. He refers to people in the LGBT community as filth, the equivalent of, quote, what the cows leave behind, as well as maggots and flies. So the quote in particular that he gave, and I'm not going to read it aloud, was made 10 years ago on Facebook, and it's Hitler's quote, and it has to do more specifically with pride in one's own race, how one should be proud of their race. And that just is so baffling to me, because when Hitler said that, he clearly was not talking about a black person being prideful of their own race. You see, because of colonialism, black people came from not just Africa, but of course were shipped and traded, not just from Africa, specifically Cameroon, but also from the Americas, and especially from the Caribbean. So within the Weimar Republic, anti-black racism was like the norm. First of all, a lot of black residents in the Weimar Republic lacked citizenship, which made it hard for them to get work, especially with the fact that there wasn't any protections like equal opportunity acts or anything like that back then. Not to mention, although not totally relevant, but still very important to mention, that Germany was going through a Great Depression at the time due to their loss of World War I and their humiliation from that defeat. Not to mention, since there were interracial marriages, a lot of times German citizens would be ostracized and marginalized, pushed further out of the community if they married a Cameroonian person. So black people, and especially the people whom black people affiliated with in Weimar Republic, were not really allowed to integrate into the country fully, especially at a social and economic level. So what all of this is really saying is that things from the beginning, especially at that part of history, weren't already great as is. So you can imagine that the Holocaust, as time progressed with the rise of Nazis and Adolf Hitler's reign of power, didn't make things better. Not to trail too far off from the main point that I'm trying to make here, the Nazis had a specific desire to preserve the Aryan race. This is why earlier they passed those legislations against abortion and whatnot. So when Mark Robinson is talking about being proud of your race and whatnot, do you really think he's talking about black people? I don't know. Possibly. But considering how he, as well as Candace Owens' stances on abortion mirror that of Adolf Hitler, on top of the fact that they have a weird fascination with Adolf Hitler himself, as well as their use of the word globalist and their views on the LGBT community, well, hey, listen, you can't keep licking that boot forever. And this is where I'm getting at, right? Recently in the United States, there's been protests against Israel's occupation of Palestine and a genocide of Palestinian people and forced removal and ethnic cleansing campaign on Palestinians in both the West Bank and in Gaza. As you can imagine, things have been getting tense, and there's been a lot of arrests of protesters made by law enforcement, and most importantly, there are people who are bitching, moaning, and complaining about protesters. And those people are cowards. I think there is a strong irony with people who have a sense of patriotism in the delusion that is American freedom, liberty, and justice for all, that supposedly exists. Yet these people are the same people who are the most willing to submit to authority quick and fast. And that just baffles me, because I have to ask, do they think that people obtain freedom by getting permission from the government? On principle alone, protesting against an ethnic cleansing campaign that the United States government itself is endorsing with billions and billions of dollars of our own taxpayer dollars shouldn't be met with a response like this.
Nothing respectful about what you're doing. Gillibrand, how can you say that you represent New Yorkers when 70% of this country demands a ceasefire in Gaza, when 45% of New Yorkers demand a ceasefire, when 53% of New Yorkers do not want to send Israeli funding or military aid anymore?
Senator Gillibrand, you received $366,000 from pro-Israel lobbies in this past election cycle. Why are you allowing your interests to be bought by foreign governments?
We're sending billions of our taxpayer dollars to kill children and women. 30,000 people have been murdered.
That bumbling fucking fool who is saying stop, stop, stop over and over again like a fucking raving maniac is exactly what I mean when I say that I hate cowards. I hate people like him. And just so you guys can hear the message that he was trying to cover up, the person was saying, and I quote, "We're sending billions of our taxpayer dollars to kill children. 30,000 people have been murdered." all of those other people who were speaking did exactly what any fucking person who gives a shit about freedom would actually do, and that is question authority. For general context, this clip took place at a town hall meeting with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She's a member of the Democratic Party, she represents New York, and she's a former House of Representatives member. And I also believe that having your interests be bought out, as they were also saying in the protest at the town hall earlier in that clip, is also, in my opinion, an example of cowardice. Because think about it, if your interests are being bought out, especially by a foreign government, putting aside the nationalist part of that take for a second here, what does that really say about how you view the people who voted for you? Quite frankly, it shows that you don't give a shit, that you only want to do what the rest of the whole government that you represent is doing, that you don't want to end up Rashida Tlaib.
I'm the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, Mr. Chair, and my perspective is needed here now more than ever. I will not be silenced, and I will not let you distort my words. Folks forget I'm from the city of Detroit, the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, where I learned to speak truth to power even if my voice shakes. Trying to bully or censor me won't work, because this movement for a ceasefire is much bigger than one person. It's growing every single day. There are millions of people across our country who oppose Netanyahu's extremism and are done watching our government support collective punishment and the use of white phosphorus bombs that melt flesh to the bone. They are done watching our government, Mr. Chair, supporting cutting off food, water, electricity, and medical care to millions of people with nowhere to go. Like me, Mr. Chair, they don't believe the answer to war crimes is more war crimes. The refusal of Congress and the administration to acknowledge Palestinian lives is chipping away at my soul. Over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed. Majority were children. But let me be clear. My criticism has always been of the Israeli government and Netanyahu's actions. It is important to separate people and governments, Mr. Chair. No government is beyond criticism. The idea that criticizing the government of Israel is anti-Semitic sets a very dangerous precedent, and it's being used to silence diverse voices speaking up for human rights across our nation. Do you realize what it's like, Mr. Chair, for the people outside the chamber right now, listening in agony to their own government dehumanizing them? To hear the President of the United States we helped elect dispute death tolls as we see video after video of dead children and parents under rubble? Mr. Chair, do you know what it's like to fear rising hate crimes, to know how Islamophobia and anti-Semitism makes us all less safe, and worry that your own child might suffer the horrors that 6-year-old Wadia did in Illinois? I can't believe I have to say this, but Palestinian people are not disposable. We are human beings, just like anyone else. My city, my grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve. Speaking up to save lives, Mr. Chair, no matter faith, no matter ethnicity, should not be controversial in this chamber. The cries of the Palestinian and Israeli children sound no different to me. What I don't understand is why the cries of Palestinians sound different to you all. We cannot lose our shared humanity, Mr. Chair. I hear the voices of advocates in Israel, in Palestine, across America, and around the world for peace. I am inspired by the courageous survivors in Israel who have lost loved ones, yet are calling for a ceasefire and the end to violence. I am grateful to the people in the streets for the peace movement, with countless Jewish Americans across the country standing up and lovingly saying, "Not in our name." We will continue to call for a ceasefire, Mr. Chair, for the immediate delivery of critical humanitarian aid to Gaza, for the release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained, and for every American to come home. We will continue to work for a real lasting peace that upholds human rights and dignity of all people and centers in peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians, and censures no one, and ensures that no person, no child has to suffer or live in fear of violence. 71% of Michigan Democrats support a ceasefire. So you can try to censure me, but you can't silence their voices. I urge my colleagues to join with the majority of Americans and support a ceasefire now to save as many lives as possible. President Biden must listen to and represent all of us, not just some of us. I urge the president to have the courage to call for a ceasefire and the end of killings. Thank you, and I yield.
Whew, wow. My goodness, for speaking truth to power here, Rashida Tlaib was censured by her other contemporaries. Not surprisingly, given 212 on yes for the Republicans, but very surprisingly, and well, maybe not all that surprisingly, 22 Democrats have voted to censure her. Now, of course, this is not the majority of the Democratic seats in Congress, of course, but this should tell you that 22 Democrats are too scared to go against their Republican contemporaries who have definitely more power in Congress. Not being able to go against the state and the status quo for what is right, especially when somebody is speaking so true to power here and resisting the status quo, that is a sign of cowardice. And now I really want to steer your attention to something a little bit more dire than this, although this is incredibly dire as it is, but our freedom of speech is in danger. Y'all realize this? During Rashida Tlaib's speech, she was referring to a resolution, and this particular resolution is referring to the House of Representatives resolution of 883. To give you an idea as to how brutal this resolution is, I'm going to read you this resolution in full. Quote, expressing the sense of the House of Representatives that the slogan, quote, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, end quote, is anti-Semitic and its use must be condemned. Whereas the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is an anti-Semitic call to arms with the goal of eradication of the state of Israel, which is located between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, whereas the slogan seeks to deny Jewish people the right to self-determination and calls for the removal of the Jewish people from their ancestral homeland, whereas Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations and their sympathizers have used and continued to use this slogan as a rallying cry for actions to destroy Israel and exterminate the Jewish people. Whereas this rallying cry can promote violence against the state of Israel and the Jewish community globally. Whereas on October 7, 2023, Hamas committed a barbaric and uncivilized slaughter against the Jewish people, killing 1,200 people. Whereas victims of this massacre included children, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, and women who were murdered indiscriminately in their homes, communities, public spaces, and at a music festival. Whereas on October 7, 2023, Hamas reportedly beheaded dozens of babies, committed countless atrocities, and violently raped women. Whereas on October 7, 2023, Hamas recorded and broadcasted to the world mutilation, desecration, and public parading of bodies. Whereas on October 7, 2023, Hamas took over 240 hostages, including children, women, elderly Israelis, Americans, and other foreign nationals. Whereas on October 7, 2023, Hamas murdered the highest number of Jewish people since the Holocaust. I'm going to take a brief pause real quick to say the very obvious, where the fuck was this resolution during the Holocaust? I'm going to continue. Whereas Hamas's 2017 charter states, quote, Hamas rejects any alternative to the full and complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. Whereas Hamas' 2017 charter states there shall be no recognition of the legitimacy of the Zionist entity, whereas Hamas' 2017 charter states resistance and jihad for the liberation of Palestine will remain a legitimate right, whereas the slogan is used by the same people who utter death to America and death to Israel. Whereas former Hamas chief Khalid Mashal called for the Day of Rage, a global mobilization against the state of Israel, which had profound consequences for Jewish communities around the world, whereas a member of the Hamas political bureau, Ghazi Hamad, in an interview about the October 7 massacres vowed, quote, "We must teach Israel a lesson, and we will do it twice and 3 times. The Al-Aqsa deluge is just the first time, and there will be a second time, a third, and a fourth." Whereas Ghazi Hamad, in the same interview, responded yes, of course, when asked if he believed in the annihilation of Israel, whereas the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, stated, quote, "Palestine from the sea to the river is the property of the Arabs and Palestinians, and no one has the right to give up even a single grain of earth or one stone," end quote. Whereas the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi on November 11, 2023 stated that the only solution to this war is the establishment of the Palestinian state from the river to the sea, whereas the founder of Al-Qaeda and the perpetrators of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Osama bin Laden, stated, quote, "Borders must be opened by force so as to obtain all of the necessary requirements to liberate the entire Palestine from the river to the sea, God willing," end quote. Whereas the former dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, stated, quote, "Glorious and sublime are our martyrs. In Palestine, Iraq, and the nation as a whole, long live Palestine, free and Arab from the sea to the river," end quote, and, quote, "Palestine is Arab and must be liberated from the river to the sea," end quote. Whereas this slogan neglects the fact that innocent civilians are used as human shield by Hamas, whereas Hamas intentionally locates its military weapons supply depot and intelligence outposts directly under and within civilian populated sites such as schools, mosques, residential buildings, and hospitals such as the Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest hospital in Gaza, whereas using civilians as shields for protecting weapons and fighters from a lawful attack is considered a war crime, whereas hateful rhetoric obstructs peace efforts, whereas the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee deems this slogan anti-Semitic, whereas this slogan incites fear within the Jewish community in the United States and around the world, whereas students attending institutions of higher education have chanted and continued to chant this slogan since the barbarous October 7th massacre, yet all the while their fellow Jewish students are being harassed and intimidated, and whereas this slogan has been used recently by violent protesters throughout the United States and the world. Now therefore be it resolved that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" is outrightly anti-Semitic and must be strongly condemned. This slogan is divisive and does a disservice to Israelis, Palestinians, and those in the region who seek peace. This slogan rejects calls for peace, stability, and safety in the region. The slogan perpetuates hatred of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and anyone who calls for the eradication of Israel and the Jewish people are anti-Semitic and must always be condemned. Oh my God, that was such a long read, but you now understand what they are doing here. They're trying to police speech, and they're doing a really bad job of it. Because let me ask you something. When was there ever a resolution for something like this with the phrase "Sieg Heil" or 1488? This is very plainly an anti-free speech resolution, which was passed, by the way, on April 18th. Oh my God. Contrast all of that with what happened in July of 2022 when Republican congressmen in the House of Representatives all voted against investigating neo-Nazi probes in the military and the police. If you're interested, this is called House Resolution 1224. I'm not going to read all of this again because, oh my god, it's even longer and I'm very fucking exhausted. It's also 3:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time where I'm at, and I'm tired and I want to wrap this up at some point. But at the time, all 208 members of the Republican House of Representatives seats, they all voted against investigating neo-Nazis in the police and in the military. Since this resolution took place in the year 2022, what does the FBI have to say about anti-Semitic hate crime in the year 2022? I think it's rather interesting. According to Justice.gov, which was summarizing the FBI report released of that year, quote, there were 2,042 reported incidences based on religion, referring to hate crime, by the way. More than half of these, 1,122, were driven by anti-Jewish biases. Incidences involving anti-Muslim, 158, and anti-Sikh, 181, sentiments remained at similar levels compared to 2021. And that's just at anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim hate crimes. Not to get too far off topic, but of course, the report goes into race-based hate crimes as well as LGBT-based hate crimes as well. But this is to say that our government doesn't really give two shits about anti-Semitism. This is nothing new. I've already talked about this before and the history of how the United States government specifically perpetuated anti-Semitism, and that this is just a ruse to endorse genocide overseas. Not to mention that really long-winded resolution that I read earlier has either had false information that's already been debunked already to death, or has information that has not been confirmed, and even the parts that are true are wildly construed, because at the end of the day, this is all a justification for bombing and murdering children and innocent civilians. Because no matter what, even if hypothetically it was true that Hamas was operating under the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, which, by the way, Israel has not provided any evidence for that at all, so far, at least as of recording this, that is by no means a justification for bombing the damn hospital, and it is also by no means a justification for policing our speech. Because think about it, friends, not only are people in the United States specifically being targeted for protesting at universities. You see, the Supreme Court did not want to hear the McKenson versus Doe hearing, which means that now the states can decide as to whether or not it is legally allowed to protest. Now, they don't directly ban protesting, but what it basically means is that if you organize a protest and say someone does something to agitate the protest, like say a neo-Nazi comes up to a Black Lives Matter protest and starts heckling and pushing everyone around and maybe even has a gun on them, the police can charge the organizer of the protest, and that organizer could be fined or cited or thrown in jail, even though the neo-Nazi was the one who incited the violence. It's punishment being directed at the people who are punching upward. So this is a blatant violation of the First Amendment, and it is rather cowardly, so cowardly, that they're doing it in this discreet, backdoor manner. This is what I mean, folks, is that I absolutely hate cowards. I talk a lot of shit about the United States, and frankly, I do want to see the empire crumble. I'm not gonna hide that fact. I don't want the United States as a government, as a state apparatus, to flourish any more than it already has. And it definitely should not be aiding Israel in an ethnic cleansing campaign. Just like how I don't think it was acceptable to have a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden during the Holocaust, but I digress. But I do care about the people whom I share a country with, and I know that there are plenty, millions of people in our country who are smart, educated, who care about others, who are so compassionate, who will literally do anything to see another person have a smile on their face. I've seen individuals in my country go way out of their way to help others, who have sacrificed so much for others to thrive and to succeed in life. And I mean that whether within family, friends, comrades, acquaintances, co-workers, and neighbors, actually. I've seen even neighbors help each other so abundantly. So you can imagine how much it grinds my gears when I see people defending the state apparatus or licking the boot of law enforcement, waving the Blue Lives Matter flag, standing with Israel, waving an American patriot flag and calling themselves patriots, saying that conservative is the new punk. Yeah, it still baffles me how I have to remind people that historically speaking and still currently speaking, conservatives have never been and will never be punk, especially if you're supporting authoritarian regimes like MAGA, Donald Trump, so on and so forth. I can understand having an opposition towards Biden. I do too. I've talked plenty about why I don't like Biden and the Democratic Party in general. But having any kind of sympathy or allegiance to Donald Trump, the Proud Boys, and all of his followers, his MAGA followers, his QAnon followers, you're not punk. You're just a poser. And now, honestly, you're a coward. That's the point. You're a fucking coward. You're like Ernst Röhm. You're hoping and counting on the fact that when shit gets too far and irreversible, that they don't come after you too. Maybe through privilege you will survive by circumstance, but oh my god. If you think that your delusional sense of false consciousness is giving you some kind of wild awakening, that you're gonna start, being really enlightened with your conspiratorial nonsense, especially when there has been plenty of people throughout our history doing class analysis of the evolution of the growth of our empire, further and further bloodying the waters around it. Oh my god, you are nothing but a fucking coward. Oh my god. When I learned how to say question authority, I didn't get raised to say that. I had to teach myself that. I had to fight for that. I had to fight to be able to have a skin that is thick and tough and able to stand against things even when things looked unlikely. It required courage, not cowardice. It required wanting and desiring and needing freedom. It required needing autonomy. It didn't require me kissing the ass of those around me who were bullying, oppressing, abusing others. No. It required standing against it. And I think it's really wild to me how America speaks a lot about freedom, liberty, justice for all. But Americans are like the quickest, the fastest, the most immediate to kiss the ass and suck the dicks and lick the balls and clean the assholes with their tongue to authority. And oh my god, I fucking hate that so much. I hate that more than anything. Because it tells me that sometimes these reactionary doofuses do not care about freedom. Instead, they just want to live in a dreamland. Maybe that's why it's called the American Dream. I want to say thank you for listening. It's been a while since I did a podcast. I actually have one coming out in a few days as well. It's much shorter than this one. But if you like this, please be sure to follow me on Spotify, where you can see all of my podcast episodes for Szabo. I also have a YouTube channel called Turbo Queer. I have a bunch of other YouTube channels you should check out as well that mainly have to do with just like gaming and music and guitar covers and bass covers, other things like that. I have a YouTube channel for memes, but more importantly, I also have a Ko-Fi and a Patreon, which y'all should subscribe and follow to and donate. if y'all want to support what I do. And again, I want to thank you for listening, and thank you for, just listening in on and being really cool and being really awesome and being based. I'm really tired. It is now 3:39 a.m. as of recording this. I need to go to sleep. So, yeah.